Hello, my name is Natalie Tawil, and I am a principal analyst in CBO's Microeconomic Studies Division. The Microeconomic Studies Division provides information and analysis relevant to a broad range of programs and policies with significant implications for the federal budget and the economy. In the work I discuss here, CBO estimated the legal immigration status of foreign-born men and women and examined how their legal status, education, and birthplace affected their employment and their earnings. The estimates are based on data for 1998 through 2018, and so predate the public health emergency caused by the 2020 coronavirus pandemic. In 2018, there were 46 million foreign-born people living in the United States, representing 1 out of every 7 people. 20 years earlier, in 1998, fewer people living in the U.S. had been born abroad, 1 out of every 10. In 2018, CBO estimates about 3/4 of foreign-born people in the U.S. were here legally. Their numbers grew steadily from 20 million in 1998 to 35 million in 2018. The increase in the number of foreign-born people without legal status was smaller, from 8 million in 1998 to 11 million in 2007, and that number has changed little since. At least 90% of foreign-born people who were here legally were naturalized citizens or lawful permanent residents. The rest had temporary legal status, usually associated with study or work. People without legal status either entered the country illegally or stayed in the country unlawfully after their temporary legal status expired. CBO's estimates focused on people ages 25 to 54 because they are typically finished with school but not yet retired. Those working age people make up a larger share of the foreign-born population than of the native-born population, largely because it is common for people to come to the U.S. to work. The likelihood of someone being employed varied by their sex, birthplace, and estimated legal status. Men were more likely to be employed than women, regardless of birthplace or legal status. But the difference in employment rates according to sex were smallest among native-born people and largest among foreign-born people without legal status. Among men, those who were native-born generally had the lowest rate of employment, and those who were foreign-born without legal status generally had the highest rate of employment. For women, the situation was reversed. Native-born women had the highest rate of employment, and women without legal status had the lowest, possibly reflecting whether or not there were children in the household. Women with children at home are less likely to work, and women without legal status were more likely to have children at home. In 2018, the share of women with children at home was about 50% among women without legal status and about 20% among native-born women. The number of working-age people who were employed increased at an average of 0.2% per year between 1998 and 2018, and that growth was driven entirely by the employment of foreign-born people. Even though the foreign-born population was much smaller than the native-born population, growth in employment of foreign-born people at an average annual rate of 3.2% for people with legal status and 2.7% for people without legal status was large enough to compensate for the average decline of 0.3% per year in the number of native-born people who were employed. That decline was partly associated with the decline in the number of native-born people ages 25 to 54, which resulted from the aging of the native-born population. Foreign-born men and women ages 25 to 54 have generally had lower average earnings than their native-born counterparts. For foreign-born people with legal status, the difference was small and has become negligible in recent years. But for foreign-born people without legal status, the difference was more pronounced. Their lower average earnings reflected lower levels of education as well as employment in lower-earning occupations. The large relative increase in the average earnings of men without legal status between 2014 and 2017 is difficult to explain. The Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals Program, DACA, expanded work opportunities beginning in 2012, but the program covered fewer than 10% of people without legal status and so couldn't account for the large increase.
There was also an increase in the share of people without legal status who had at least a college degree and therefore probably higher earnings. Many of those people probably remained in the U.S. after their temporary legal status had expired. But the increase in their numbers was insufficient to account for the large change in average earnings. For a native-born person or a foreign-born person with legal status, the likelihood of being employed was consistently higher with each successive diploma or degree. But that pattern didn't hold for foreign-born people without legal status. Their employment to population ratios varied relatively little by education, and at an average of 73% from 1998 to 2018, were most similar to the employment to population ratios of people with a high school diploma or some college in the other two populations. Among people without a high school diploma, people without legal status had the highest average employment to population ratio from 1998 to 2018. It was 72%, compared with 65% for foreign-born people with legal status and 53% for native-born people. People without legal status may have had more interest in working, more employment opportunities, or both. Greater interest may partly reflect the important role of work opportunities in motivating people to live in the U.S. without legal status. Their greater interest may also reflect that they are not eligible for many income security programs available to others.
People with higher levels of education had higher average earnings regardless of birthplace and legal status. But foreign-born people without legal status had the lowest average earnings at any given level of education. The difference between their earnings and those of others was least pronounced for people without a high school diploma. Among people with at least a college degree, foreign-born people with legal status had the highest average earnings in recent years. That is entirely because of those who were educated beyond college, and it's partly explained by their occupational choices. Compared with others, they tended to work in higher-paying occupations, for example, as computer software developers and engineers. In 2018, about one-third of foreign-born working-age people were from Mexico, about one-third were from Asia, with half of them coming from India, China, and the Philippines, and about one-third were from the rest of the world. Employment to population ratios by birthplace varied much more for women than for men. Women from Mexico were least likely to be employed. In most years, their employment to population ratio was at least 10 percentage points lower than those of women from other places, but that difference has fallen in recent years. Men and women from Mexico and Central America, ages 25 to 54, had lower average earnings than their native-born counterparts, 40% lower for men in 2017, for example. Workers from Mexico and Central America tended to have less education and to work in lower-paid occupations, such as those in construction and agriculture. Men and women from India, China, and the Philippines had higher average earnings than native-born people. In 2017, about 40% higher for men and about 30% higher for women. Workers from India, China, and the Philippines tended to have more education and were less likely to work in lower-paid occupations. The data I've just presented come largely from the current population survey. CBO's estimates of legal immigration status were based on individuals' responses to that survey and also incorporated three adjustments. First, CBO ensured that the national population totals implied by the survey data matched the Census Bureau's preferred population estimates. Second, CBO compensated for survey undercounting of foreign-born people. Third, CBO ensured that the estimated numbers of foreign-born people by legal status corresponded to the numbers that CBO derived using demographic methods, administrative data from the Department of Homeland Security, and data from the Census Bureau. CBO's estimates of the number of foreign-born people without legal status are comparable to the analyses of other researchers, but all estimates of immigration status are uncertain. More information about the results of CBO's analysis and its estimation methodology can be found in The Employment of Foreign-Born People, available on CBO's website. If you have any feedback about this presentation, send an email to communications@cbo.gov.